Okay, yeah, good morning, everyone. So I'm sorry I couldn't be here in person. I actually tried to see if one could get from San Francisco to Lincoln late last night, but it didn't quite work out. So I came back to Chicago instead. So I'm going to talk about big data from a Department of Energy perspective, and I think the goal really is to expose you to some of the specific concerns that arise in that part of the nation's research community and some of the work that's going on. So I suspect that some of you are deeply familiar with the Department of Energy and others not so much. So I'll start off with a few words about it. Next slide. So the DOE, I think sometimes people jokingly refer to it as the Department of Everything. It's a very large US government agency. Its responsibilities range from topics such as basic research and facilities, which is what I'm going to be focusing on, to the design of nuclear weapons, which is a completely separate part of the agency. There are other elements also that are concerned, for example, with fossil fuels, environmental cleanup, and so forth. My own lab, the Department of the Argonne National Lab, and many others of which you are familiar, form part of DOE called the Office of Science, which is, as its name suggests, concerned with the support of research in a variety of topics that are viewed as being energy related. So within the Office of Science, you'll see there's a set of 6 of sub-offices, I guess you might call them. The one that might be of most interest to us today would be the Office of Advanced Scientific Computing Research, which I'll be talking more about, but there are also a variety of other offices as indicated here. If we go to the next slide, slide 3, you'll see a nice mission statement. And what's interesting here, I think, is to understand this dual focus of the Office of Science within DOE, which is on funding research, research that is conducted primarily at the national labs, but also at universities. The DOE funds a fair bit of research in universities across the US. So a dual focus on research and the operation of scientific tools or facilities that are intended to support the research of the US and in some cases the international science community. And roughly, as you can see, roughly a 50-50 balance between those 2 elements. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that this focus, dual focus on research and facilities leads to the Department of Energy Office of Science supporting a substantial number of scientists across the US. There's a total of 32 national scientific user facilities that it operates. And as shown here, these support more than 20,000 users per year in various ways. So just to sort of say a few words about each of the major slices here. Light sources, high energy X-ray sources, ranging from things like the advanced Photon source at Argonne National Lab to other more specialized resources. Computing facilities, supercomputers, so some of the world's fastest supercomputers, such as the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility and the Oak Ridge Leadership Computing Facility, which support some of the fastest machines in the world, and then the NERSC facility at Berkeley, which is a more general purpose system. There are high energy physics facilities, nuclear physics facilities. These are more traditional colliders and such like, and then various sequencing facilities such as the JGI and atmospheric monitoring facilities such as the Advanced Radiation Monitoring System, ARM, up in the top left. So, interesting combination of supercomputing and then a wide variety of more traditional experimental facilities. Now, what does this have to do with big data, you might wonder? Well, if we go to the next slide, I think you'll see indicated here a few examples that science across the Department of Energy is increasingly running into major barriers, I guess. You can view them as either barriers or opportunities relating to the availability of very large amounts of data. In some communities, such as high energy physics, this data deluge is already upon the community, and in fact, the high energy physics community has put a lot of energy in successfully harnessing that deluge, for example, via the development of the Large Hadron Collider at CERN and the associated Large Hadron Collider computing grid, which has allowed them to process, these many petabytes of data that are emerging from the LHC, and, for example, find the Higgs boson in the midst of that data. In other areas, such as genomics and light sources and simulation, the data deluge is something that's currently underway, and people are starting to work out how to respond to. The common factor here is exponential technology advances are allowing people to collect far more data, and I'm sure other speakers have already spoken to some of those issues. What's interesting about the DOE is the particularly wide variety of instrument types. For example, light sources, which I'll say more about later. A single light source can generate 300 terabytes per day at the moment, and that's a number that's expected to increase substantially in the future. And then the existence of supercomputers that are dedicated to performing particularly large simulations. So DOE supercomputers, unlike some other supercomputers operated by other agencies, are often focused on performing relatively small numbers of very large simulations. For example, simulations of future climate change scenarios. And today, climate simulations generate petabytes of data. The climate community projects that they'll be generating hundreds of exabytes. That seems a little bit unlikely to me, but we will see how that works out. So this data explosion in science, I think, as you will have heard from other speakers, represents a tremendous opportunity. It also represents some very interesting technical challenges. Of course, there are the I think well-known challenges inherent in managing large amounts of data. There's also a need for big compute to make sense of large amounts of data, and something that I'll say a bit more about, I think a lot of very exciting technological and scientific opportunities inherent in linking simulation and big data to tackle problems that would not otherwise be accessible. And we'll give some examples of that in a little while. Next slide. So DOE is, as they say, a mission-driven agency, although it does fund a lot of pretty basic research. But in principle, DOE projects and offices are often take a pretty long perspective view on the facilities they're building and the scientific challenges they're seeking to address via those facilities and the research they fund, and this leads to frequent, not frequent within a single discipline, but across the entire space of the Office of Science, fairly frequent long-term requirements reviews, and one that was conducted recently was focused on data requirements within the Office of Science. And there's just, I guess, give here a few examples of the sorts of requirements that are seen in terms of basic data rates, and of course from there you get many other much more interesting requirements in terms of computation, storage, cross data source analysis, and so forth. And so you'll see these range from cosmology, the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, so DOE, Office of High Energy Physics, has a strong interest in cosmology. The ATLAS experiment at the Large Hadron Collider, which is already generating data after a substantial reduction in hardware at a gigabyte per second, and is expected to scale up as they continue to modernize and upgrade the detector at the LHC and increase the brilliance of the LHC beams. The climate simulations, tunneling electron microscope experiments, just as one example of a different sort of facility. Genome sequencing, APS beamlines, which we'll say more about, and other nanoscience and spectroscopy applications. So all of these have, what I think it's sometimes hard for us to remember that it's not that long ago that, for example, a X-ray science application, might take a day to generate a single, rather low-resolution picture. A single PhD student might, in biology, might spend a whole thesis, PhD thesis, sequencing a few tens of or hundreds of base pairs of sequence, and so the transformation in science inherent in the data rates shown on this slide are quite tremendous. So let's move to the next slide. So, as I said earlier, the Office of Science has this a number of sub-offices. The one that funds scientific computing facilities, supercomputers, and research around advanced scientific computing is the Office of Advanced Scientific Computing Research, OSCA. And this slide just mentions briefly the sorts of activities that OSCA funds at present. Basic work in applied maths, and a lot of work on scalable algorithms, libraries that encapsulate those algorithms. Work on computer science. You'll see in the first two bullets and later a particular focus on exascale computing, i.e., computers that are substantially faster than the fastest computers available today, which might run at 10 or 20 petaflops, i.e., a factor of 50 slower than an exascale computer. The computer science research spans a pretty wide gamut in that space, from computer architecture through to data management mechanisms, visualization techniques, and so forth. An ongoing effort in what's referred to as next generation networking, but is really about not just networking, but middleware and collaboration technologies for science, working at extreme scale. And then a set of projects that are both so-called co-design partnerships, working with disciplinary offices on developing future scientific applications, particularly focused on supercomputing, exascale class supercomputers, and the prototyping and evaluation of next generation supercomputer systems, for example, via deployments at places like Argonne and Oak Ridge and Lawrence Berkeley Lab. So if you were to read this statement of Oscar's science focus, you see data mentioned a couple of times, but it doesn't emerge as a primary focus, and I think that is probably a correct representation of Oscar's current funding focus. But I'd say two important things. One is that focus already encompasses a fair bit of big data work in the context of large-scale simulation. And secondly, we expect that big data will emerge over the next couple of years as a new thrust area for Oscar and Office of Science more broadly, in response to some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier. Next slide. So I thought I'd now use some examples with which I am quite familiar, primarily work based at Argonne, to illustrate some of the work that's being done across DOE. And I think that's illustrative of some of the areas that DOE is interested in funding and sees as growth areas in the future. At least we hope they see them as growth areas. So we try to capture in this picture, pick slide 8. Hopefully you're in the right place. A perspective on how both research and development activities at Argonne and more broadly across DOE in data-driven computing may be structured. So the motivation for work at DOE is always application science, data-driven discovery, and data-driven science applications, that enable discovery. And in support of that, work on algorithms, analyzing large quantities of data, environments that allow researchers and research teams and projects to rapidly engage in analysis, infrastructure, for example, file systems and network protocol and so forth that allow people to manage large quantities of data and analyses of that data, and then facilities or infrastructure, I guess hardware facilities that are capable of processing and storing and manipulating large quantities of data. So let me say a few words about each of these. Next slide. First of all, slide 9, let me just zoom in for a moment on one particular instrument. This is one of the 32 user facilities operated by the Department of Energy, but I think it's illustrative in its concerns of a number of topics that arise across DOE. So APS, the Advanced Photon Source, as you can see here, it's a ring. It accelerates particles around this ring, periodically bending the beam in a way that gives off focused, high brilliance streams of photons that can then be used to image a wide variety of different materials, biological samples. They can also sometimes be used to actually modify samples in various ways. And there are currently 63 beamlines operational. Many of them specialized to a particular requirement, like say X-ray crystallography or tomographic imaging, or some other function. Others more general purpose. They support in a typical year about 4,000 on-site users. A total of 5,000 experiments may be run. They may, as we show in the next slide, generate in total maybe up to 2 gigabytes per second of aggregate data rate. So slide 10 gives us a flavor of data rates, they vary tremendously. They are all expected to increase. The next slide gives an example of some of the fascinating science that can be achieved with this facility. Studying defect structure in disordered materials via a method called single crystal diffuse scattering. Nanotomography, which is a method, I guess, somewhat similar to MRI, but applied at a much finer scale, which allows you to look inside and understand the very fine 3D structure of materials, and various other more specialized techniques that look at various properties in sometimes less direct ways, and that require much more processing often to extract information from the signal that emerges. For example, bottom right, high energy X-ray diffraction microscopy, one is able to understand in some really interesting ways the microstructure inside a bulk material. So if you have for example, a metallic wire, inside a metallic wire you have this essentially this crystalline microstructure, and understanding that structure is pretty important for understanding the ductile and other properties of the material. Okay, so next slide. Slide 12 illustrates what I think is one, or provides a context for talking at least about what I think is a very exciting set of opportunities that are emerging across the Office of Science for new approaches to scientific problem solving based on the integration of experiment and simulation. For example, using the example that I just mentioned, the X-ray diffraction microscopy. So a single experiment using this X-ray diffraction microscopy will take tens of minutes to collect data. The data historically has been put onto a USB drive and shipped back to the home institution of the experimenter for analysis, which might take weeks or even months, depending on the sophistication of the person involved. At that time, they may find that the data they collected is bad because the sample was misconfigured. So one immediate opportunity is for improving the effectiveness of these apparatus is to do real-time reconstruction and analysis of data so that one can automatically check experimental results, reconfigure experiments, and so forth. And we're currently doing that using an Argonne supercomputer and using tens of thousands of cores in burst mode to perform data analysis. A yet more interesting opportunity is then to be simultaneously running large-scale simulations with perhaps the data collected at a facility serving to provide initial conditions, perhaps for a simulation, perhaps the simulations being used to solve the inverse problem to determine what, for example, material structure might account for the observed results, and those simulations can then be used to guide future experiments. So there's some very opportunities for new modes of science and research based on this integration of data, experiment, and simulation. And these new modes certainly don't only arise at light sources. Similar concerns arise in cosmology, where, for example, large-scale simulations of the evolution of the universe are being compared to data collected via sky surveys. And again, trying to solve basically an inverse problem to find what set of physical laws might account for what we see from these large cosmology experiments. So lots of fascinating stuff going on there. Let me mention one more science application, and then we could say a few words about technology. DOE also has a strong interest in systems biology for a variety of reasons relating. Early on, it was primarily due to issues around environmental cleanup. There is now, this work is also driven by interest in alternative fuels, biofuels, for example. And so there's and I would say also actually an interest in climate change, for example, the potential impact of climate change on the microbial communities in soils, for example, in the context of the changes in the environment of permafrost in higher latitudes. So the systems biology knowledge base is a cross-DOE project seeking to pull together large amounts of data and modeling and simulation in a way that will ideally permit much more rapid research than is currently possible in this space. Next slide. So in a way, it's a similar sort of scenario to the APS one, if you like. But here, the experimental facility is the genome sequencing center, sequence genetic material, both for individual organisms and increasingly also for metagenomes. And the computing is maybe more concerned with data analysis and simulation of alternative theories about how gene functions are assigned to genes. Okay, I should probably move on here. So let's say a few words about some of the research challenges that emerge across these fields and some of the work that's going on. So slide 15 now. Algorithms, big data analysis is in some sense fundamentally an algorithmic problem. Science, big data in science has a lot of commonality with big data and other disciplines, but also a lot of uniquely science-specific problems. Just give one example here. Given the large quantities of
Ian, can you hear me? This is Deb. We need to wrap up. Can you do that in just a couple of minutes?
Of course, yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So, let's see. So, I'll say a few words. So, fundamental algorithms, for example, automating the process of labeling entities in images. There's a variety of such activities underway. Slide 17, building algorithms that can, and environments that can allow us to scale analyses. For example, analyses of climate data is shown here to very large amounts of science data. Slide 19, building infrastructure that can support this to span multiple labs. Actually, I think we can at this point just move forward to slide 26 and suggest that people who are interested in learning more about data across Office of Science labs might want to study this research, this report, which says a lot about requirements across a pretty broad range of application domains. Slide 29 gives you my contact information in case you're interested in following up on anything.